they may, they may have been in conflict or crisis, whatever it is. They are, needing something outside of themselves. Okay, let's put it that way. So there's a story in 2 Chronicles 19, but the background to it is in the couple of previous chapters. There's a new king named Jehoshaphat. He's a good guy. He does the right things. He honors the good side of his heritage. He establishes practices, restores some order in Judea, and it's going to be a good story, it feels like. But then he gets aligned with the northern kingdom of Israel, who's led by Ahab and whose wife is Jezebel. And the story can't go very well from there. His son marries their daughter, and they form a military alignment, which is a bad alignment. And it even goes against the advice of a prophet. And the long and short of it is Jehoshaphat almost gets killed by a trick. And as a result of that, he's been humbled. It's a cautionary tale. It's a sad story. And then in 2 Chronicles 19, okay, let me see if I can't figure out how to do this. We see this. When Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, returned safely to his palace in Jerusalem, Jehu the seer, which is a prophet, son of Hanani, went out to meet him and said to the king, "Should you help the wicked, Ahab, Jezebel, and love those who hate the Lord? Because of this, the wrath of God is on you. There is, however, some good in you, for you rid the land of the Asherah poles and have set yourself and your heart on seeking God." Now, Jehoshaphat lived in Jerusalem. So this is a moment we find out how Jehoshaphat responds. "And he went out again among the people from Beersheba to the hill country of Ephraim and turned them back to the Lord, the God of their ancestors. He appointed judges in the land, and each of them fortified the cities of Judah." There were probably about 20 cities. He told them, "Consider carefully what you do, because you're not judging for mere mortals, but for the Lord, who is with you wherever you give a verdict. Now let the fear of the Lord be on you. Judge carefully, for with the Lord our God there is no injustice or partiality or bribery." In Jerusalem also, Jehoshaphat appointed some of the Levites, priests, and heads of the Israelite families to administer the law of the Lord and to settle disputes. And they lived in Jerusalem. He gave them these orders: "You must serve faithfully and wholeheartedly in the fear of the Lord. In every case that comes before you from your people who live in the cities, whether bloodshed or other concerns of the law, commands, decrees, and regulations, you are to warn them not to sin against the Lord. Otherwise, his wrath will come upon you and your people. Do this, and you will not sin. Amariah, the chief priest, will be over you in any matter considering the Lord. And Zebediah, son of Ishmael, the leader of the tribe of Judah, will be over you in any matter concerning the king. And the Levites will serve as officials before you. Act with courage, and may the Lord be with those who do well." Now, what may not be obvious to everybody here is that this was what I would call a reset. Jehoshaphat's response to Jehu the seer was to go around to the county or the countryside and bring them back to the precepts from Moses. He took a page out of history hundreds of years earlier where Moses set up processes and principles for judging matters fairly. And it was scaled so that you had low-level judges, middle, and high-level judges. And the emphasis was on impartiality and wisdom in capable people, and using typically the priesthood to operate in some of these roles. So what Jehoshaphat did was reset himself according to the Bible of his day. He didn't innovate. He wasn't creative. This wasn't his ideas. He was to set things in place according to what should have been in place that he had neglected. That's what we're hoping to do over this process with this consultation. Today is the conclusion of a report. It'll be imperfect. There will be feedback from you, perhaps by email, to say, you got this date wrong, or did you know about this? No report is perfect, but it's a starting place for an important conversation about resetting the Knoxville church. And so this will be another chapter coming forward that I would like to be in an advisory role with, but you have Steve and Diane Brown there working with your leadership team, and I think we're going to be able to see some progress felt very soon. Okay, here's your timeline of your church, all the people who've served. There's been a few periods where there was interim young interns and rotated preaching, but those are the main people that have been there. All of those people in bold are with either the International Churches of Christ, the Christian Church, or Churches of Christ, except for I think one couple that I was unable to reach. But that's your story. And I hope I got the dates right. I tried to collaborate with a lot of you. This is your growth cycle over time. In the year 2000, you probably got up to about 130 members, but about 10 moved to Nashville that year. So at the end of the year, you were at 120. And you've had different rides and ups and downs. And it's important to remember a lot of your people that came into your church family were campus. And when they graduate, they move. So campus-oriented churches often don't have the steep high growth of getting into the thousands as maybe like some churches where you were so wrapped up into a major campus in a smaller city like Knoxville. So this doesn't reflect necessarily all the positive contribution that Knoxville has made in Tennessee and beyond. What we're going to talk about today towards the end is what's ahead, but we've had an assessment. I ran it by my wife, ran it by Steve and Diane. I got their feedback. Steve and Diane met with more people than even Tricia and I did. I think we combined met with 42 of your 57 members, plus former members. But Steve and Diane have met with even more than that. And so this became a learning time for all of us in the leadership group. Today, you get general and specific recommendations. I won't spend a lot of time on the general ones, but these are the reset of processes, and I'll explain those in a little bit. After you get these recommendations, and you will have access to the full 29-page report, we're hoping that you will take a time of reflection. Maybe this will be part of your devotion and your quiet times and things like that. And after I go through the specific recommendations today, we'll talk about what's ahead before you can actually say we are landing on the there that we hope to be at. Takeaways. We're going to talk about strengths and room for improvement. The questions that we asked, and we asked a variety of questions, but these were the ones that we asked the most frequently. Are there any elephants in the room, or kind of general topics that need attention? And then what else do you think is helpful for us to understand? If we only ask one question, question one or question two, we might get some help. We have to kind of unpack it at a deeper level. And we did find some reoccurring themes for sure. We also wanted to know who in the congregation has the abilities and the trust in the event of a significant change. Let's say that there was some dramatic event. Who would you want to stand before the congregation to help you? And then who are those who can preach and teach and edify the congregation? There were a number of names in both those questions, and the ones most frequently reported are in the report. These were super helpful for us. Our notes, more than 40 people representing a wide range of roles and circumstances and length of time in the church. We didn't want to ask people from all the same, kind of station in life and place in the church. Some of the findings, recommendation, have recurring themes with our family of churches. Families of churches, sects, denominations, they have patterns where they have their strengths and their weaknesses, and that's also true of the International Churches of Christ. And there were very unique themes just related to your family. Okay, first of all, strengths. There is a warm, generous, and hospitable spirit in the congregation. We felt it, we saw it, and it was reported by you that that is how you perceive your church family. And that's super encouraging, because without that, it's really hard to build any cohesion in the sense that we can go to the next place. So that is a trait of the congregation. But there's also humility about the past and a desire to learn. That's not always the case. I've gone into consultations where people don't even want us there. We've got this figured out. You shouldn't even be here. I didn't give you permission to be here. You know, that kind of thing. You have people not in a good place. Okay. None of that here. None of that. That there's great humility and desire to talk. And so it was very refreshing. And the fellowship during those interviews was great as well. And so we did this in Zoom, but we did it. I met people at Barnes and Nobles and different places where we could have coffee, a lot of Starbucks. I love Starbucks. So we had a lot of great times talking to you. And I sense that real desire to learn and contribute to learning. There is a faithful core that will persevere in the challenges. That's just your perception of you. It also came out in the survey that we'll cover in a moment, but that came out in the interviews, and you could really sense it. And you also have people that have been around even much longer than the Knoxville church has been in existence. So those people have been really significant contributors to, hey, we can get through this. I've been here before. And so you have that institutional memory that, hey, churches have hard times and they have good times. The current leadership is approachable and very responsive to outside counsel. And that's like so important. And it was perceived by you, the church, but also experienced by the Statens and the Browns. And that kind of eagerness makes our task very refreshing and really easy to talk about sensitive topics, which we'll cover some of those here shortly now. Now, room for improvement, okay? Back in 2017, there were developments that were painful for those who were no longer in the Knoxville church, painful for those who were there. Matter of fact, you have people that came after 2017 that could tell there was something really hurting in the church. They could see it in the eyes of the congregation. And it revealed prior difficulties required greater biblical clarity, processes, and records. That was a tough year. There was church disciplines and warnings that were reported differently. Hard to really harmonize and reconcile both within the congregation and those who've left. And by the way, that's not unusual if there's not an experience of dealing with these kind of matters on a regular basis, moderating difficult topics. And I would say, to be honest with you, to be very transparent, this is not a strength. And the International Churches of Christ, historically, we're getting better to deal with people that are mature but have a dissenting perspective, would like to try things differently, or if they're a bit outspoken. And so moderating and topics and mediating relational conflicts has not been a strength. Back in 2015, I was leading a task force for a family of churches with a handful of other people on how to do church disciplines, which are really rare, okay, in our churches, which is a good thing. But when it happens, we want to do it really, really well, from the spirit of winning people over, not being punitive, out of love, staying connected. If somebody's gone from the church from some unpleasant way, we don't want to write people off. They're extended family, and we want to, if possible, maintain a rapport to figure out what went wrong, and if repentance is needed, help make that happen. You know, resolving conflicts requires competence, impartiality, and agreeable processes. In the Old Testament and Deuteronomy and Leviticus, it really emphasizes you have to have people that are seasoned, impartial, and wise. And that's Deuteronomy 1:9-18 covers that. And it's really important that impartiality is really emphasized. Plus, agreeable processes. You want, if somebody is part of a conflict that is going to be mediated, it needs to be safe. The person facilitating it needs to be an acceptable party by both parties in a conflict. And what's really important too is lack of favoritism. In the Bible, you're not supposed to show favoritism to the strong or the weak, the rich or the poor, people in position, people in no position. It's all about resolving the actual conflict and so forth. And I think what's happened in 2017, what was revealed with people that had different ideas than the status quo, is that there wasn't the training. And it wasn't like there was incompetence. I'm not trying to put past or present leadership in a bad light. It wasn't sufficient for the moment. And I'll tell you what, as a consultant for the last 9 years or 8 years, I think, I'm not always competent for the things that I'm walking into. That's why I set up teams. And we get better and better. We grow because we handle a new situation that we've never handled before. And that's really important that we learn from those things. And that's what I'm hoping we can help you with. Hiring processes could benefit from greater vetting and clearer job descriptions. Past hiring of the past couple of ministers were not bad. They were better than what had maybe done in the 1990s. There was vetting and there was job descriptions, but it could benefit from going further in best practices, which I outline in the report. And so that's one area I think I can help with. Shepherding needs to become a higher priority, or even the highest right now with the leadership group. And what we learned, both the Statens and the Browns observed, but also from the leadership group, is that operational things has taken such a high priority recent months, understandably. Sudden loss of a leader back in December, and then trying to reshuffle, figure out where to go next. No judgment, that's just normal. But now that we are coming around the corner with our consultation and aiming for a reset, we want to see shepherding be out front with the right people who have those gifts, not losing those skilled people that are part of operations, things related to the building, schedules, and other very essential functions. We want to do good in both categories. And then there's a general lack of consistency in being in each other's lives, is what we heard reported. Now, that is most certainly exasperated by the pandemic. That's not even a bit of a surprise, but we don't want to let that excuse us from in the past. And certainly where we are now, we can do much better with the increased subsidizing of the pandemic. It's not over, but we are in a better place than we were before. We did ask a question on a survey, what people's thoughts were related to social distancing, mask, and attending and so forth. We didn't really get anything that was cohesive from it, so I left it out of the report. But what we did decide is for those who want to meet by Zoom out of safety concerns that are legitimate from their perspective at this time, maybe there could be a house church formed with just those people, because it could be more seamless for the church. But that's a side footnote. What we do want to do is to improve on being consistent in each other's lives, and we'll cover that in a moment again. So the survey, an appreciative inquiry survey, is where you are finding what people aspire for the future and what they don't want to lose from the past and what they have in common. So we have only got about 22 of the 57 members to respond to that survey. That's kind of normal. I get about a third, okay, when I do this in the past. It's designed to find out what moves the congregation, and also to enhance other things that we found out from interviews to see if we maybe get fresh perspectives. The questions are meant to be processed from like Philippians 4 and Hebrews 10 from hey, whatever's good to think about. Let's think about those things. Let's tap into the good of the past and recapture some of our best moments. And those kinds of questions are in the survey. I'm showing you a picture right now of some seeds that have sprouted in our window in our house the plants are all aiming towards the window, as you can see. The sun will only come from one direction, the way they're positioned in our house. They're leaning towards the sun. That's called the heliotropic principle. And with congregations that hit a plateau or get stuck for some reason, what we want to do is help the congregation lean into the Son, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, really, lean into God, but together, and to be much more in a cohesive way. And that's where some of the advice we have will help you do that. And the questions you'll see here, we're not going to get into the answers. You can do that, read them yourself. Strive to remember the experiences in the church that where you were the most spiritually alive and excited about your involvement. Or what practice in the church would you like to throw away for good? What would you like to recover? What is the positive feature of the Knoxville church? Now, this is one of my favorite questions. If you were able to peer 30 years into the future and you discovered that the church was collectively doing great things for God's glory, what are some of the things that you think would have enabled us to get there? Some people call it reverse engineering a successful future. Like, how do we get there? Well, and when you find some common themes of how people think of how you got there, that leads to very helpful conversations, very edifying ones for fellowship time. Okay, now we want to do what Jehoshaphat did. When he went around to all the towns and the countryside, he said, consider carefully what you must do. And then he set before the people the practices that hundreds of years earlier Moses had set. That's the seriousness I want you to embrace what we're going to talk about next. Both the general recommendations we won't spend too much time on. They're very important, but they're low urgency. I would consider these like homework to have, on an ongoing basis, come back and revisit, see how we're doing. Are we implementing the training and so forth? The specific recommendations are for the very near future in Knoxville, but the leadership team can set the priority for those three recommendations, where to start between the three. And then there's one specific one for all church members. Consider carefully what you must do. Okay, so the first general one is strengthening mentoring for the prominent roles. 2011, I was doing a mediation in a place, a very large church, and I realized that a very significant person with a lot of authority had no tethering, no real discipling. People didn't know what he was doing with his time, and it became a real challenge leading to some conflict. And I called upon that large church to make it a practice that every leader who has a lot of responsibility should have three people in their life. Somebody maybe a long distant mentor, somebody locally, a supervisor, or at least a peer. And then get this, a regular member of the congregation who's mature should be in the life of that top leader. We want to get away from a pyramid leadership and have more of an umbrella, okay? Where it's a little bit flatter at the top, okay? And then I had 8 questions that those 3 people should be able to know about that leader. And some of them are positive, long-term vision, but others were what's going on in their personal life, Embrace robust problem-solving processes. Identify gifted mediators and moderators. Sometimes the best people at this are not even in the ministry. They happen to have professional training in HR or working in nonprofits or risk management. We want to be gift-based in the church, not just position-based. And so these are things to think about. Recapture your congregation's vision and mission and so forth, okay? And when people are talking about the same aspirational future, it brings people together, like the heliotropic principle that I mentioned. And then lastly, come together with one accord. The Greek word that's used for with one accord in the book of Acts and in Romans 15 is homothumadon. And what it means is people coming together with a fiery passion moving in the same direction. It's like we're 1 and 1 equals 3. The people are better than the sum of their parts coming together. And you can imagine a musical symphony where people play different instruments and come in at the proper time working together. Any one of those instruments would sound pretty cool by itself. But when people come together and are a one accord, following the same script, they become better than their sum. And so it's a great aspirational section to read. Okay, so now specific recommendations. This is for the leadership here. This is a reset, important concept of reset for the leadership. And by the way, in the report, I cover other resets, where that comes from, and in a biblical sense. And sometimes even mediators will have a reset concept where they will go, listen, I can't really fully understand why that conflict you had 9 years ago, how it played out, who was more wrong, and you're asking me to give my take and arbitrate, whatever. I can't necessarily say that I have it figured out, but why don't we agree to some practices from this set forward that we will embrace to make sure we never get into that kind of conflict again. That's kind of like a reset, okay? So I think the 2 areas that you should take a lessons learned approach in the leadership is moderating congregational change and conflict, like from the lessons of 2017, where you lost precious people. And again, this is not about who's more right or wrong and all that. This is just about what can we do to make sure in the future, based on what happened in the past, we do better. And then vetting processes for hiring. Very specific practices in the report about making sure you have a background check. You go back 2, 3, 4 congregations where that minister has previously served, understand what you're doing. And by the way, this is not a personal comment about your past leaders going over your 30 years, or it's more like 25 years. Like, my math is not good right now. But since 93, 94, this is not about that. It's about what you should do anyway. It's just smart. It's wise. And by the way, I will be sending to the leadership group a process for which to engage the entire congregation on a hiring process that ultimately, it's not like a voting thing, but it does bring in the whole church into it, where they can ask questions, and so that you are able to get a really solid decision that involves the candidate, their history, and it's been used almost 10 times, and I'll pass that your way for whatever happens next. But given that to you by itself isn't going to make a more promising future, there has to be a sense that it's agreed locally, yeah, we can do better, that sort of thing. Defining and aligning leadership roles. I talked about before, we realized that shepherding is taking a backseat to operations during this past 4 months, but doesn't have to be the next 4 months. And so the Browns and the Statens will help the leadership group in making recommendations, not decisions. We don't have any decision-making power ultimately. This is your family, your congregation, but to make recommendations of who are those shepherding types, who are the people that are helping the sheep run well, church run like a well-oiled machine in operations, admin, and all these other things. I realize your board is on the smaller side, could possibly use some more help. And then the preaching and teaching and helping suggest those who on a rotation. But I think you kind of know that already. But and it's in the report, but I think we want to get better on this. Okay, now I'm going to throw an opinion your way. Okay, this is just an opinion. It's not in the report. You have people in your church that are qualified, in my opinion, to be elders. The qualifications for an elder is great family, that person's legacy, their character, they're meeting the criteria of 1 Timothy and Titus 3. Now, when and how that would happen and how it would be recognized, identified, and whatever, that's a topic for another day. And the reason I want you to know that is we were just impressed and encouraged by the resourcefulness and the wisdom and the humility of what you have in your congregation. And so hopefully that's an encouragement statement, not an agenda for something the consultation will enact, obviously. But you have a board president who's, he and his wife have 4 Christian kids. I mean, that's fantastic. Your team for operations is very seasoned, even coming from other churches, right? Preaching and teaching as well. So, but I think there'd be more clarity on finding those roles so that the body functions as best. Improving decision-making practices. Okay, there's 3 common ones. Okay, one is a lone leader makes a unilateral decision, but it's high risk and eventually has consequences because no leader, self-included, sees everything and has the qualifications to, say, here's what needs to happen. I've seen fantastic evangelists make bad decisions about building a church building. I saw this on the West Coast, and it was the evangelist became the general contractor for the building. And he went way overpriced because that wasn't his gift set. The requirement for unanimity, that's often troublesome because it keeps the church in limbo and gives a struggling and potentially unqualified person veto power. Can you imagine being on a team of 12 people and one person's always saying, no, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to do that. So it stops the church in its tracks. The best decision-making practices is supported by consensus, majority support. It's very good providing the topic was thoroughly considered and the right people are in the room. And one way to make those decisions really sound is rotate who facilitates the discussion. So it really becomes the cream rises to the top, the best decision gets made. One of the ways to really improve decision-making practices is deciding in advance who would be the best person to run point on that discussion in advance. Because some people may say, I think we need our own church building. Who are we going to hire? Who can help us with our finances? Whatever, you can make a list of the kind of things that would come up. Typically in a church your size, it's about 5 kind of decisions that get made over an arc of a couple of years. But you want to make sure you tap into the congregation, gift, experience, and bring them into that equation. And so it's kind of like a matrix. You have who can run point the best based on their legacy, their experience, and then who should be on that team to process that decision, and then who would the greater advisory group be? And so that's a very common way for churches to make decisions. Now, what about for the Knoxville church members? Okay, there is one really important thing that we want to get across, and it ties in a little bit to becoming of one accord that was in the general recommendations, but it's a little bit different. So I wanted to give it its own space here. That all church members make an earnest effort to recapture your greatest faithfulness. What do I mean? This is one of the things that I see quite a bit in churches is that older congregations run on the fumes of previous eras. People's memories are those fumes. the old stories are in people's minds, but those old stories are not part of the present reality. So let's look at Hebrews chapter 10, verse 32, and recapture that spirit. Remember those early days after you received the light, when you endured in a great conflict full of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution, and other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You suffered along those who were in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. You know, when we look at our present experience, and if it's not what we want it to be in the church, we have to ask ourselves, am I putting in to my fellowship, my community, my small group, the Sunday worship, the midweeks? Am I putting in what I did way back in the day? We can't get more out of the present than what we put in. And you know how it was, and maybe in the old days, we weren't always wise about what we did. We were kind of on the radical edge. Tricia and I one time led 3 Bible talks between the two of us, and I was an engineer and she was a teacher, okay? That was crazy. It was not sustainable, okay? But it was exciting. It's a good memory for me, right? Now, would I recommend that people do that today? No, definitely not. But we eventually kind of, figured it out. We had really one great Bible talk group that we led, and we helped a lot of people become Christians. And that's repeatable. That's doable today. And so think about your best times, and this includes your devotion, your practices, your understanding of the Word of God, your confession of sins to people in your life, being open. If you haven't done that in a long time, you've lost muscle memory, because when we did it all the time, we continued to know what to do next. And, I've lost a lot of muscle memory around personal evangelism, and the pandemic has even made it worse. So I'm preaching something that is something I'm also working on, but my Bible study, my fellowship, my relationships are things that I'm definitely doing very well in right now. But you think about your own muscle memory. What have you lost touch with? And so think about that when you want the church to be the best version of it yourself. It includes volunteerism. And you can probably look at your congregation right now and say those same 10 people are doing the work of 30, And so go back, read that scripture, and think about it. Now, we're wrapping this up here for just a moment. We did an assessment. We learned some things. We shared our learning with the leadership group. We today provided general and specific recommendations. We're asking you to reflect. Now, what's ahead? We will work, meaning the Browns and the Statens will work with the leadership group in realigning in those categories, especially operations and shepherding. We would like to see wisely done, and don't feel compelled to do this, but reconnect with former members, but do it advisedly. It's probably a difficult thing. I don't know right here today how everybody should do that, but if you run into people that used to be members, especially those who left during that tumultuous time, you should greet them. We are asking you to lift the stigma of any warning or rebuke or anything towards any former member, to hit reset. Love covers a multitude of sins, and give everybody a chance, okay? And also to be reflective of, hey, did I shun people? Did I give up on people that I should have stayed connected to? Just to think about it. Now, Steve and Diane will give you direction over the coming weeks and months how to wisely go about doing this. We're just saying, let's be open to reconnecting and seeing what God will do. Every individual's a unique situation. Every church member is unique. And you may have things that need to be worked through before you feel like you can jump in that direction. That's why it should be done slowly, methodically, advisedly, not a rush, but to love all the people of God, people that left, people are in other places, and to make sure that the people feel welcome to start over. Give other people a chance at a reset as well. We would like to see it recommend a day of renewal, a renewal of committing to your best version of yourself to the best of your ability. This is not formulaic. This is not in or out talks that we're recommending. We're just asking people, insofar as where you are now, moving forward to be where you can best be a contributing member to the congregation, and there'll be some guidance on that. And then lastly, a decision on the next leadership era, whatever that may look like. I think these other three things have got to be priorities so that when you are looking to hire perhaps another minister, another evangelist, a teacher, whatever you're going to hire, that you hire what is most suitable as you guys are starting to come around the corner as redefining what kind of church you want to be. I don't think it's important that the Knoxville church tries to look like another church in our fellowship. You have your own unique town, its own history. And I believe that the Browns would want to stay advisors, and from a Tennessee perspective, long after they would return back to Nashville. And of course, we would want to be available as advisors as well. But that process for hiring next, let's get these other three things figured out and go from there. So now I'm going to stop sharing and be open for some. Now, Dan, are you doing communion now?